We're going to begin this hour with the latest from Florida as we await the start of that hearing centered around the search of Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago residence.
The federal judge will hear arguments on whether or not to release the affidavit filed in support of the search warrant that led to FBI agents searching the property. NBC News correspondent Sam Brock is in West Palm Beach this morning with the latest for us.
At 1 o'clock Eastern later today, a small federal courthouse behind me in Palm Beach County becomes the center of the political universe. Of course, this is against the backdrop of the DOJ warning that unsealing that affidavit could compromise the investigation and any future witnesses. Now, the document itself is expected to contain key clues as to why investigators went into Mar-a-Lago in the first place, as calls for transparency grow.
The pressure for the federal government to show its cards in last week's unprecedented search of former President Trump's Florida home now set to come to a head in a federal courtroom, even as investigators continue to sift through a trove of documents. The same judge who signed off on the search warrant will hear arguments from a wide-ranging group, Trump's legal team, his allies, and media organizations, including NBC News, who've pushed for the affidavit to be unsealed.
We want it released. We want full and complete transparency for the American people.
The legal wrangling comes after an inventory of items taken was released, revealing 11 sets of classified documents, some marked top secret. The Washington Post, citing people familiar with the investigation, has reported some were connected to nuclear weapons. Legal experts say a release during a highly sensitive investigation would be extremely unusual.
If there's an ongoing criminal investigation, in other words, a legitimate law enforcement purpose for keeping an affidavit sealed, most judges would defer to that. In fact, I would say all judges would defer to that.
The Justice Department argues a release could cause significant and irreparable damage to this ongoing criminal investigation. Former Vice President Mike Pence weighing in on Wednesday.
The American people have a right to know.
But Pence also pushing back on recent threats to the FBI.
We can hold the Attorney General accountable without attacking rank and file law enforcement personnel.
The former VP also asked if he'd participate with the unrelated January 6th investigation, in which some Capitol attackers called for Pence's hanging.
If there's ever any formal invitation rendered to us, we'd give it due consideration.
Following a crushing primary loss for the committee's vice chair, Liz Cheney, Trump blasting her on social media as too angry and sick to succeed in the future. But Cheney says she'll continue her committee work and fight to keep Trump from a second term.
Are you thinking about running for president?
That's a decision that I'm going to make in the coming months, but it is something that I'm thinking about.
As for the hearing later today, it is possible the judge tries to strike a middle ground. But what exactly would that look like? Potentially, he could release a portion of the affidavit, but legal experts say in the event that happens, it would be filled with redactions. As for the decision, it could happen today. It could happen at a later date, which he talks about. There may not be a timetable. All of us are waiting to find out. In Palm Beach County, Sam Brock, NBC News.
Sam Brock, thank you.
Former President Trump's former personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, faced a grand jury in Atlanta on Wednesday. He spent 6 hours testifying as a target of the criminal investigation looking into possible 2020 election interference. NBC News correspondent Blaine Alexander is there and has more.
Well, Rudy Giuliani spent 6 hours inside the courthouse here behind me, testifying under oath behind closed doors before this special grand jury. Now, of course, these are closed proceedings. We do not know what he was asked inside, but we do know that it very likely centers around statements that he made to Georgia lawmakers back in 2020, just on the heels of the presidential election, where he made a number of false claims, conspiracy theories about Georgia's election. Now, after the testimony yesterday, an attorney for Giuliani did not go into specifics about what he talked about, citing grand jury secrecy, but an attorney beforehand did give some indication as to what he was not going to speak on, saying that he would stay away from any conversations that he had with the former president and that he would likely cite attorney-client privilege. Now, of course, remember, all of this centers around an investigation into the former president's efforts to overturn the election here in Georgia, but specifically pointing to a phone call that he made to Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, essentially asking him to find enough votes to overturn the Biden's win here in the state of Georgia. Now, overnight, the former President Trump weighed in on that, calling it a perfect phone call once again. But all of this is once again widening the possibility of exposure for the former president and any of his associates to criminal exposure. Now, all of this comes as we're seeing the investigation itself widen here in Georgia. In fact, this morning, Georgia's Governor Brian Kemp is fighting a subpoena of his own, calling it politically motivated this close to November. Back to you.
All right, Blaine, thank you.
And now to some strong criticism of the CDC from the director of the CDC.
For the first time, Dr. Rochelle Walensky says the CDC failed to respond quickly enough to the COVID pandemic and needs to be overhauled. This comes as the agency confronts new threats, including monkeypox and a troubling reappearance of polio. NBC News national correspondent Gabe Gutierrez is here with the latest. Gabe, good morning.
Joan Savannah, good morning. The new steps grew out of an external review the CDC director had ordered in April. It is a blunt acknowledgement that the CDC fell short with so many lives at stake.
This morning, a sweeping reorganization of the CDC is underway after the agency's director offered a stunning rebuke of its COVID response. Dr. Rochelle Walensky now says in our big moment, our performance did not reliably meet expectations.
We learned some hard lessons over the last 3 years, and as part of that, it's my responsibility, it's the agency's responsibility to learn from those lessons and do better.
Throughout the pandemic, the CDC has been blasted for shifting guidance over masks.
Kind of just laughed because it was like 2 weeks ago. I feel like they just like got rid of it.
Testing.
It seems like you all don't talk amongst yourself.
And other recommendations.
Why is the guidance so confusing?
Thank you for the opportunity to clarify.
The agency's external review found public guidance had been confusing and overwhelming, that CDC leaders rotated out every few months, and that important data were inexplicably released too late to inform federal decisions. The changes now include a new executive council, a new equity office, and a more streamlined website. Dr. Walensky also plans to ask Congress to grant the CDC new powers, including mandating that local jurisdictions share their data.
Our government agencies weren't designed to manage a once-in-a-century crisis like this. And I think while many of them performed admirably, there is no question in my mind that these agencies could have done better.
The course correction comes as federal officials face criticism over the monkeypox vaccine rollout and new concerns about polio, just the second instance of U.S. community spread in 43 years. Last week, health officials announced that polio had been detected in New York City's wastewater.
Make sure that your children are protected because this is a very, very serious disease.
A polio vaccine clinic opening in Rockland County, New York.
I may have gotten it as a child, but I wasn't sure about my records, so that's why I came.
The CDC says almost all children, 93% across the U.S., are vaccinated against polio before the age of 2. If you aren't sure, most states do allow you to request immunization records online. Doctors say a polio booster is not recommended if you got your initial vaccine as a kid.
I've seen a lot of articles about teenagers texting their parents, did I get vaccinated?
It's hard to know. It's hard to find those records sometimes.
Yeah, it is, and it was a long time ago, but it's good information to have. All right, Gabe Gutierrez, thank you so much.
Gabe. Turning now to the desperately dry conditions plaguing the country, the West is in the midst of a 23-year drought. And as reservoirs dry up, states are haggling over who has access to limited resources. NBC News correspondent Steve Patterson joins us with more on that. Hey, Steve, good morning.
Joe, good morning to you. Let's start on the Colorado River. It serves as a hydropower highway from Lake Powell all the way to Lake Mead. It's the nation's largest reservoir where all that excess water is banked in a system that supplies that water to 40 million people in the West. Now that supply is dwindling and the crisis is serving as a microcosm for the problems that are associated with climate change.
On the surface, the boundless beauty of the Colorado River feels eternal. But just underneath, an increasingly urgent threat is rising faster than ever before.
The Colorado River is about 20% smaller than it was just 20 years ago.
That river supplies water to 7 states and 40 million people. Now, the system that sustains it is simply no longer robust enough to maintain that output.
We really need to reduce the amount of water we're taking out of the Colorado River by something like 20% for the long term.
The river's 2 main reservoirs, Lake Powell and Lake Mead, are now nearly 3/4 empty and projected to continue dropping. Facing a Tier 2 shortage for the first time in history, authorities say in January, Arizona will lose 21% of its yearly water allocation from the river as Nevada loses 8%.
And just to give you a sense of the scope of this crisis, you go back before the drought and where I'm standing right now, I'd be about 40 feet underwater.
The consequences of drought and water shortages are now playing out everywhere. In the Northeast, water restrictions in 78 New Hampshire communities. This past July was the hottest on record for Texas since 1895 and the 5th driest in that same time period. 34% of the Midwest is abnormally dry or experiencing drought. 70% of the West is in a moderate drought, and 98% of California is in a severe drought. Farmers are now facing an uncertain future. Third-generation Arizona farmer Nancy Kaywood says less than half of her 247-acre farm is producing crops.
We're not making money. We don't know how long we can hang in there.
The crisis creating a domino effect. Less availability and higher prices in grocery stores and restaurants, no work for laborers, and billions of dollars in lost revenue. A startling new reality impacting every level of life from coast to coast.
So the drought is bad, but we are not at the point where tap water is suddenly going to stop flowing. The bigger impact truly is agricultural, so food variety, availability, and pricing will be most impacted. Joe?
So, Steve, what steps are cities taking to combat the drought?
You know, they're forced to adapt. So let's say the cities that are most impacted by the drought, like central Arizona, cities like Phoenix and Mesa and Tucson, and some cities, of course, in Nevada as well, about 83% of the water that goes into waste treatment is now being reclaimed, as an example.
All right. Joe? Steve Patterson, thank you so much.
Now, parts of those drought-impacted areas could see some flooding over the next few days, as both New Mexico and Arizona could see monsoon conditions for that. And what else is happening in your neighborhood? Let's check in on your Morning News Now weather.
Michelle Grossman's back with that. Hey, Michelle, good morning.
Hey there, guys. Yeah, we're looking at that monsoon conditions continuing today, also throughout the weekend. We're going to see it picking up tomorrow, and then it's combining with an area of low pressure. So they're joining forces to bring some really heavy rain. The soil's so different in the Southwest. It's more clay-like, so we get flooding a little bit faster. And we're looking at 3 to 5 inches of rain in some spots. So this is the flash flood risk for today. We're talking about the Southeast. We're also Southwest. We're also talking about the Southeast with a really slow moving front that's bringing showers and storms and really torrential downpours. So as we go throughout the day, we're going to focus on the Southwest first because we're looking, as I said, 3 to 5 inches of rain throughout the day. And then tomorrow we're going to see really heavy rain, and that's going to continue into the weekend. So here's the setup. We have that monsoon rain that's been going on for months. That's beneficial for this time of year. But when it goes over the same areas, that's where we have the problems. And we have an area of low pressure. That was the same system that was in Texas. It brought tropical moisture to Texas. It moved off to the west, and it's combining with this monsoon moisture, and that's why we're getting that really heavy rain. It's going to continue tomorrow. It's going to continue Saturday. I do have an extended weekend outlook that I'll show you in just a minute. So we're going to be contending with this for quite a while. Where you see these darker colors right near Tucson, Silver City, we're looking at the heaviest rain. Phoenix also looking at some rain as well. Now, talking about the Southeast, that's going to be another spot where we're looking at soaking downpours. We have that slow moving front that's going to bring showers and storms. Some could be on the strong side. Some could bring some really gusty winds, even some hail in spots. But the biggest problem will be the heavy rain in spots, again, where you see those darker colors from Texas along the Gulf Coast into the Southeast. That's where we're looking at that really heavy rain. Elsewhere, we're looking at heat in the West, temperatures into the 90s, into the triple digits. We've been seeing this all week long. We're going to continue to see it into the weekend. So when heat waves go on and on, that's when it gets really stressful on the body. And especially in places that aren't used to this. So we're looking from Washington through Oregon into California, even into portions of Idaho. 17 million people impacted by a heat advisory or an excessive heat warning, and that jet stream bringing that hot air. So 104 in Sacramento today. That's well above normal for this time of year, and 105 in Fresno. We'll see those numbers once again as we go throughout the next couple of days. But taking a look at the weekend forecast, we're going to start at Friday because we consider that the weekend, don't we? We're looking at that flood threat once again in the Southwest. Downpours in the Southeast. Really nice start to the weekend in the Northeast, but we're going to bring in some showers, especially in the Great Lakes, into portions in the Mid-Atlantic. But look at all that rain still in the Southwest. Back to you guys.
All right. Thanks, Michelle.
Going on, as always. Thanks, Michelle. Now to America's ongoing battle with inflation. New retail numbers are showing the toll it's taking on families, small businesses, and big box retailers alike. NBC News correspondent Maggie Vespa is in Chicago outside a Target store. And Maggie, the retail giant says it's taken a big hit even in its latest earnings report. Tell us the latest.
Yeah, Savannah, definitely a stunning hit. Target executives confirming yesterday their second quarter profits fell roughly 90% compared to this time last year. So, of course, that number shocking a lot of people. This as new federal data shows just how much everyday Americans are stretching their budgets to try and make ends meet. From major retailers to everyday families.
Like I tell my kids, it's just the stuff that you need, not the stuff that you want.
The ripple effects of inflation are reaching every corner of American life. Target confirming their second quarter profits plummeted roughly 90% from last year, with executives blaming price slashes on excess merchandise, goods stuck on cargo ships during the pandemic that have now arrived en masse. Consumers grappling with their own money woes.
We try to go from store to store and get, whatever is cheaper.
Less than 24 hours after President Biden promised relief via the Inflation Reduction Act, new federal data shows between June and July, spending remained stagnant, with Americans shifting minimal savings from falling gas prices to afford basics. Online shopping is up, as are some retail sectors, namely food sales, but not nearly enough to cover decades-high inflation. Translation? Families are spending more on less.
Yeah, everything here is store brand.
While restaurants patiently take the hit.
One day, chicken wings are affordable and great, and the next day you can't afford chicken wings for the price.
At Stadium Club in McCook, Illinois, Steve Palmer changes the menu weekly to work around fluctuating prices. The stress holds steady.
My house is on the line for my business. So if I have a bad week, who knows?
The toughest part? The uncertainty. Experts share that pain.
We're still a bit confused about where this economy is going. The economy is neither sort of plunging nor soaring. It's kind of holding there in the middle, and we're waiting to see what happens.
And one retail sector that, by the way, month to month really took a hit is auto sales, down roughly 1.5% from June to July, with some car dealers saying it's not that demand is low, it's that they don't have the inventory, and that amid the chip shortage in particular, they literally don't have the cars to sell, with some consumers waiting 8 to 10 months for the car they want to buy to be available. Just adding to that frustration for everyday families.
Maggie, it's like you cued that engine revving yourself just a second ago for that tag. Thank you so much.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.